What's up, guys? It's the Bluebloods, and we are back with another episode. We have another special guest previewing the upcoming national championship with us. Tony Tsoukalas is with us from BamaInsider.com. He is a beat writer for them, and I just want to say appreciate you joining us, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
For sure, for sure. So I feel like it's always right to start with Alabama. Every year you hear people from Fox Sports, ESPN, there's always some doubters that say the Saban dynasty is over, is coming to an end. What is the number one thing for you being around this program that other programs try to replicate but don't get right, that Bama keeps this dynasty rolling year in and year out?
I mean, I think when you look at Alabama, it just nobody has a Nick Saban, and I think that's just you can't replicate it. I think you can come close, and you've seen a bunch of his assistants try to take aspects of his style and his process. But I mean, this is the best coach the college football's ever seen, and so when you're looking at that, that's really what sets Alabama apart. But I just really think like. The thing that people don't get about Alabama is they win all the games that they're supposed to win. You never see Alabama get
Right.
upset by an unranked opponent. Sure, they lose games. I mean, it's impossible not to lose games, but that's the consistency that Nick Saban's been able to establish at that program is really, to me, when I'm covering the team, the thing that stands out. You never see, for example, Ohio State, right? I mean, they've had a nice little run as well, but you'll see them lose to a Purdue or a team like
Right.
that, and Nick Saban just doesn't allow his team to do that. Yeah, sure, they'll lose some ranked games here or there, but that's what's allowed them to be in the playoff picture so much. I mean, when you look at last year, it was such a disappointing year for Alabama, and they lost twice, and both of those
Right.
times were to ranked opponents. So um, that's really what stands out for me.
Right. And do you think it's more of a can't get over the hump, or do you think Saban just has that much of advantage over his assistants? You see Tennessee hired a Bama assistant, Georgia, Oregon with Mario Cristobal's having huge success out there. What is that? What do you think is the hold up there why Saban assistants can't beat Saban? We saw Lane Kiffin this year give it a great run, but in the end, Saban won that game.
I think when you look at a lot of it is just where are these assistants landing? I mean, look, you see Jeremy Pruitt landed at Tennessee. Well, Tennessee's so far off of Alabama. I think
Right.
if a guy like Kirby Smart played at Nick Saban every year, you would assume that Kirby Smart would break that streak. It's just, he hasn't in the games he's played. Nick Saban kind of, this week alluded to the fact that it's going to happen when
Right.
one game, there's too many assistants, eventually
Right.
one of them is going to beat Alabama. I think you could look at a guy like Lane Kiffin, gave him a run. I still think Ole Miss is far off, but if one of these guys can stay in the conference long enough, maybe Jimbo Fisher. Maybe that's a guy that
Right.
look at what he's building at Texas A&M. I mean, eventually you've got to think that this there's nothing little about it, but this streak is going to end.
Right, right. And so last night, DeVonta Smith takes home Alabama's third Heisman Trophy winner following Mark Ingram and Derrick Henry. Can you kind of speak on the offensive revolution we've seen? Because this, like the past 3 years or so, this Bama offense has looked completely different from those early Saban offenses. And what makes DeVonta Smith such a special player? And why do you think he broke that wide receiver mold to win the Heisman?
Yeah, I think if you look at, Alabama is no different than a lot of the college football in general. It's moving more to a spread attack. Or receivers are more important. DeVonta Smith has had, in my opinion, the best season from a receiver ever.
Yeah.
But I kind of think that, while he did break that mold, I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we start to see more receivers win the Heisman, just with the importance of the position. Look at how it's getting drafted in the NFL. It's almost like receivers the new running back. I wouldn't be surprised if
Right.
maybe moving forward that, possibly you could maybe see less running backs when they award him more receivers. I still think it's going to be a quarterback award. And even that statement with the receivers is kind of bold, since, we've only had one in the last,
Yeah.
30 years, or two in the last
Yeah.
30 years. So, but I could definitely see that trend starting to open up a little bit more. And DeVonta did, help start that. As to what makes him such a great receiver, I think when you look at just he's smooth and he catches everything. I think he's really smooth in his routes. He's effortless. He does a lot of things well. He's not like Henry Ruggs, where he was the fastest, or he's really he punches above his weight strength wise, but he's not some guy that's just he's not like Terrell Owens, where he's just built like that, or
Right.
Calvin Johnson or somebody like that that's just totally built. He's a guy that can block well, and he can get out of press coverage. But I think really just his hands, first of all, he catches anything by him, and then just the route running and his footwork on his routes, I think is great. I think he's going to be a great college receiver, NFL receiver. I think, I've heard some comparisons to Marvin Harrison, and I kind of like that. My dad grew up in Boston. I rooted for the Patriots, and I hated watching the Colts
Yeah.
against the Patriots because of Marvin Harrison. It seemed like every time Peyton Manning would throw a ball near his area, Marvin would catch it. And I get that same feeling. I'm obviously covering the team. I'm not watching it as a fan, so I wouldn't know what an opposing fan thought of of going against Alabama. But when you look at the way DeVonta Smith just makes these catches, if I was an opposing fan of that team, man, it would drive me nuts, because it's like he makes these catches that he shouldn't make, but when the ball's in the air, you almost know he's going to make them. And that's just, I think, what
Right.
makes him special.
Well, speaking from experience, as you see the Auburn stuff in the background, I woke up this year during the Iron Bowl, and I wasn't even excited for the game. I kind of knew what was going to happen. And my co-host, who's at work right now, he's an LSU fan. He had the same feeling when he woke up for the LSU Alabama game. But, we've both talked about this Bama team seems historically great. And when I say that, I mean one of the best Alabama teams, most complete Bama teams ever. Covering the team, you've seen so many players and assistant coaches and all kind of stuff come together. Where would you rank this team in terms of just pure talent in Alabama teams that you've covered, or that just like in Alabama history in general?
It's tough, because I think you could look at that team last year. If you're just going off of talent, the team last year probably had more talent, because it has a lot of these star players. Plus, not Mac Jones had a better year than Tua, but when you look at it, they had Tua, they had Jerry Jeudy, they had Henry Ruggs, and this whole mess of receivers that they currently have. I think that what sets this team apart is it's just, especially this offense, is it's so just balanced. It has the right components. The line is there, and I think everyone forgets about this offensive line. It won the Joe Moore Award, and that's probably the most important part of this offense, because it really allows everything else to go. Then when you've got, an experienced Najee Harris, you got a guy like Mac who can get the ball out to receivers. And then, DeVonta Smith's just really stepped up. I mean, look, we're going to get to see in the national championship game, maybe if Jalen Waddle's able to go. And at this point, if you reinsert him back into this offense, it's really unfair, just because of, it was already great with him, and then they continued to rise back up to that level, and now putting him back in. Well, I don't. We'll see if it happens, or what will happen when it happens. But you'd have to think that it just rises to a new level with him. And there's just so many weapons. On the defensive side of the ball, we've certainly seen better Alabama defenses. I don't think this one's at that elite level. I don't think if you looked around college football, you'd see very many elite, defenses. So it's good enough. It's not great. It'll give up big plays here and there, and there's just nothing that's just going to happen. That's just something, if you're watching this defense, that's just something it does. I fully expect Justin Fields to make a few big plays in the national championship game. I'm not saying that they're going to win, but I would be very surprised if that offense doesn't at least find a way to expose Alabama a time or two. The problem is this Alabama offense is so good that even if you are able to expose its defense on occasion, it's not enough, because the offense scores almost every time up the field.
Right. And, you mentioned Jalen Waddle coming back. Is there any update on that? I know last time it was the kind of big break was that he was practicing and would be questionable. In your opinion, do you think he's going to play? Or if he does play, do you think he'll be back at 100%? Or will he be more of like a decoy? We've seen coaches put players out there just to kind of sway the coverage away from someone like a DeVonta Smith. What do you think the plan is for Jalen Waddle as of right now?
So as of we're talking right now, it's Wednesday afternoon. Alabama's probably practicing at the moment, so I'm assuming this is his second practice. It's kind of too early to tell whether or not he will play. I mean, Alabama players earlier today said that, Tuesday after his first time out there, they said he looked good. Granted, I mean, look, they're not going to say he looked bad. So we'll see. There's really no way to know what he's doing. The thing, there's been a lot of talk about this possibly being a smoke screen for Alabama to get Ohio State to prepare. You don't really see Alabama do that. That's just not that kind of crafty kind of stuff, that head game kind of stuff. That's really not what Alabama does. Look, Nick Saban's pretty, he can be somewhat abusive to the media, but the one thing I think he does really great is give us injury news. I mean, there's a lot of coaches that do not do anything with injury news, and Nick
Right.
Saban's pretty. I mean, as open as you're going to get a head coach to be open about injuries, and I think that the message out there is that Jalen Waddle is cleared to play or cleared to practice, so you would assume that he's cleared to play. It's going to come down to his comfort. Look, this is a guy that's going to be a first-round pick, probably a top 15 pick.
Right.
We saw what NFL teams thought about Henry Ruggs, and I think Jalen Waddle's just a step slower and then probably more talented as a receiver than Henry Ruggs. So I could see him being drafted around the same slot as Ruggs was. So he's got a lot of future to protect, and if he's not 100% or if he doesn't feel comfortable, Alabama's proven that they can win without him. So I think it will come down to him, but by all accounts that I've heard, that he really wants to play in this game, and so if he's able to, I think he will. I don't know if he'll be 100%, but with that speed and his ability, and if he can provide any of that, I think he'd be an added boost to the offense.
Yeah, I think it takes that offense, like you said, to a whole new level. You got Najee Harris to worry about, DeVonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, John Mechie has been unstoppable at times. But looking more at the X's and O's of the game and some players, can you give us one offensive player and defensive player that you think will have the biggest impact on the game in terms of who wins and loses this coming Monday?
I really think that, from Ohio State standpoint, or what they're going to try to do is probably try to shut down the passing game. I think that kind of seems to be the play with Alabama. So we've seen Alabama kind of lean on Najee Harris at times, and I would expect him to have a big game. And he's a guy too that you can put out in the passing game, and he can really hurt defenses in multiple ways. You saw what he did in the SEC championship game. I kind of see this game looking a little bit more like the SEC championship game, where it's going to be somewhat of a shootout. I kind of expect Alabama to control it. I think if you look back to the SEC championship game, while it was close, I don't think you really ever thought that Florida was going to win that game. It was just kind of, it was a close one. They could have won the game. I mean, they were right there, onside kick, and they have a chance at it. But that's kind of how I see this game playing out. It might be closer on the scoreboard than it necessarily was, but I do expect both teams to get points. On the defensive side of the ball, I think it's just going to be that Ohio State defensive line, and can they maybe expose the loss of Landon Dickerson? Chris Owens is a guy that's been able to fill in admirably this season, whether it be for at right tackle for Evan Neal against Arkansas, or against Notre Dame, but he struggled in the Rose Bowl, both in pass protect and in run blocking, and he's going to have a better performance in the national championship game look at what Ohio State's defense did to Clemson. You can't have them getting in the backfield like that and disrupting Mac Jones the way that they were able to disrupt Trevor Lawrence at times. So I think that's your biggest matchup right there. It's just that front against Alabama's front, specifically at the center position. And when you look at the defensive line, if you can get pressure up the middle, that's how you really can affect quarterbacks. So big test ahead for Chris Owens, but he's a redshirt senior. He's got a lot of help around him, and I expect him to bounce back.
Yeah, that was my matchup. We had a preview episode, and that was my matchup to watch, is that interior defensive line for Ohio State. Those are some boys right there that are going to be first round NFL draft picks.
Oh yeah.
And so, like, looking for this week, Alabama, Nick Saban, as you know, no distractions. If there's a distraction, he handles it. But this week you had the Heisman Trophy ceremony with DeVonta Smith. You have Steve Sarkisian taking the head coach's job at Texas. I've seen some Alabama assistants are going to go with him to Texas. How is the program handling all these so-called distractions? And do you think it will play any role this upcoming week?
From the message that they've conveyed, during these virtual press conferences, it seems like they're handling it really well. Steve Sarkisian seems focused. The players seem, pretty at ease with this transition. But we've seen this before, where it's a tough balance to handle. I mean,
Right.
it's one of those things that I think you can do it for a week. If this game was to get delayed, I think it might actually become more of a distraction. It doesn't look at the moment as we're talking right now. It looks like the game's going to be played on Monday, and I think they're going to be able to get through this distraction. I mean, look, when you look at the way Alabama's handled things this season, they have just been driven on this path to the championship. You've got the leaders on this team, seniors that came back wanting to win a championship, wanting to amend from last year when they lost 2 games. You got guys like DeVonta Smith, Dylan Moses, Alex Leatherwood. These guys, they want to end their season. That's why they came back, um, and they're playing for Landon Dickerson too. So, but like they've been able to balance all these distractions, whether it be the social stuff earlier on in the off season or COVID or, losing their coach to COVID for a game. They were able to manage all that. So I expect them to get through this. It's a really battle tested team, and they know that they have some history on on the line. I think you talked about it, I think earlier, where this team, if they can get through it and they can go undefeated with an all SEC schedule and just I don't know if you'd call them the best team ever, but they're definitely now in that conversation just with what they've had to overcome. I think it's going to come down to, what's your favorite flavor of favorite team or best team, but they would certainly be in the conversation. I think that's something that they, really want to be remembered for and be a part of.
Right. And then, before we get your like final thoughts on this game, I know Saban's legacy is already written in stone. You've said it. We had a thing on the podcast about the greatest coach of all time. We both picked Saban. I mean, at this point, what does this do for his legacy, if anything?
Well, it equals him with the amount of national championships as Paul Bear Bryant. So that's the big thing right there, is that I think, if you're just looking from a number standpoint, to equal that record would be huge. But I think, when you look at this season, like we just talked about, all the obstacles, could this be, when you look back at Saban's career and, even with him getting COVID and having to come back and missing, has there been a coach that's had to overcome as much? Is this one of the best head coaching jobs? I think a lot of times when you look at Nick Saban, he's put together such a great program that it seems like, oh, well, what did he have to do? He already put it together. How hard is it to coach a bunch of 5-stars? But look, he's done a great job of keeping these kids together. Look at how Alabama's handled these distractions, and that speaks volumes to him and the job he's done and keeping everyone focused and creating an environment that seniors like, Alex Leatherwood and like DeVonta Smith and Najee Harris, that they want to come back to, and building that and really kind of harping that goal. So if he's able to pull it off, it's big. And then on the flip side, if he loses, that will be 2 straight losses in a national championship game. And I think that you'll probably have people talking about him. It's crazy how this kind of stuff works. But when you're in these high profile games, it's sometimes you're only judged on how you do in the high profile games, which is tough. So it could be somewhat of a swing game. I don't think anyone's gonna, if Alabama loses to Ohio State, I don't think anyone's gonna say, oh, Nick Saban kind of overrated or anything like that. But it will be a blemish on his career, and so it can kind of swing both ways.
Right. And so I don't know if you give us an official prediction, but what do you expect to see at the end of the night on Monday night?
I expect both teams to kind of go back and forth at times. I think Alabama will be in control. Probably most of the game. I think that they'll never pull away necessarily. I think Ohio State's probably okay. It's hard for me to talk up too much because I had, a couple weeks ago, I had said that Clemson's the only team that can beat Alabama. And after seeing Ohio State, I really don't know what to think about them because I wasn't as impressed with Ohio State. And then looking at them against Clemson, yeah, sure. That's certainly a team that can beat Alabama. I think Alabama will hover around that 10-point range, probably win something like 40-31 or, in that area. I haven't really given it a number prediction yet, but I kind of expect Alabama to be up around the 10-point range. But when you say that, I mean, what is the line, like 7 or 8?
Yeah, it's 8. It's 8 as of right when we started recording.
Yeah, so if it's at 8 and they go over it at 10, I'm not trying to disrespect Ohio State. I think it's going to be a close game, a game that Ohio State could have theoretically won. I think you'll be able to look back at times, but I think Alabama will be pretty in control the whole game as well.
Right. Do you think Mac Jones takes the MVP?
Man, I don't
That's
know.
tough. I
It's
know that's a
tough
tough
because it
question.
seems like, well, does Jalen Waddle play? Because if Jalen Waddle
Right.
plays and they can get the offense going through the air, I think they'll spread it out more. Elsewise, it kind of looks like lately when they've been getting stuff in the air, DeVonta Smith's found a way to get open, and
Right.
if Mac Jones throws for 300 yards and 180 of them to DeVonta Smith, well, they're going to give it to DeVonta Smith. I think it could go to
Right.
Najee, like I said.
Hmm.
He's a guy that can influence the game in multiple ways. I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama won, if he was the guy, with the MVP trophy. But yeah, this offense has shown me that it could go anyway. We say all this, it's probably going to go to like John Mechie or something, but
Right. Or Malachi
so many
Moore,
weapons
someone
on
on the
this offense.
defense.
But I would, if you're having me guess, yeah, 10-point Alabama win, and Najee Harris probably as the MVP.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, I have Alabama too. I have Alabama by about 14. I think they pull away late as well. The defense inside that defensive line is really the only strength of that Ohio State defense. And with how this Alabama offense has been rolling, I was like you. It's hard for me to cover this game because I said the only game I'm looking forward to is Clemson, Alabama, and then
Yeah.
that happened, and so here we are now with Ohio State, Alabama. But we definitely appreciate you coming on. Make sure to please go follow Tony on Twitter. Go check out Bama Insider everything. Do you want to drop your Twitter handle and everything?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is Tony_Tsoukalas, and you can spell my last name as Tsoukalas, so Tony_Tsoukalas. Also follow us at Bama Insider, and we have a really great YouTube channel too, so check that out. The Bama Insider YouTube channel. We got new content on that every single day, so that's definitely worth checking out as well.
For sure. So you guys know where to find that out. But we will be back very soon with the national championship recap after the game. But guys, you know where to find us: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all that stuff. But we'll be back soon. But for right now, we're out.